They refused to pay for my college, then demanded $150,000 for my sister's wedding. My response left them speechless. I never thought I'd see the day when I'd be forced to choose between my dignity and my family, but that moment came as sharp, cold, and unforgettable. Growing up, I always knew we weren't rich, but I believed love and fairness made up for what we lacked in wealth. My parents worked hard, they said, and everything they did was for our future, or so I thought. I was a quiet child, observant. I noticed how my sister, Olivia, always seemed to get the better things. New clothes, expensive tutoring, dance classes I could only watch from behind the studio glass. She's younger, my mom would say. She needs more help. I accepted that. I told myself it didn't matter. I got good grades. I earned scholarships. I believed hard work would close any gap, but I was wrong. When senior year arrived and I got into my dream college, a top-tier university with a full academic ride but some living expenses uncovered, I turned to my parents, hopeful. It wasn't much I was asking for. Just some support with books, rent, maybe a meal plan. My mom looked away. My dad folded his arms. We just can't help right now, he said. You're smart. You'll figure it out. It hurt, but I nodded. I took on 3 jobs. I barely slept. I missed out on friendships, events, even meals. But I made it through. Graduated with honors. Landed a job at a growing tech company, climbed the ranks, saved. I didn't tell anyone back home much. There was always a distance there, a silence I couldn't name. Years later, out of nowhere, I got a call. My mom, breathless with excitement, told me Olivia was getting married. She's always dreamed of a fairy tale wedding, she said. We want to make it really special. You're doing so well now, can you help with the cost? I asked how much. She didn't hesitate. $150,000. I thought I misheard. $150,000 for flowers and a dress and a rented ballroom. For a sister who never once called to ask how I was surviving college. For parents who watched me drown in work and said, you'll figure it out. I laughed, not out of humor, but disbelief. And that's when I realized they hadn't forgotten my struggle. They just never cared. I didn't argue. I didn't raise my voice. I simply said, no, but the story didn't end there. They were stunned. My mother sputtered through the phone, asking if I was joking. You make 6 figures. How can you say no to your own sister? She shouted. But I remained calm. I made it without help, I said. So can she. There was silence, then tears. Then, the guilt trips began. Family means supporting each other, my father said in a text. You're letting money get between blood. But wasn't it them who drew the line in the sand years ago? Wasn't it them who watched me suffer while they poured what little they had into Olivia's hobbies and dreams? I wasn't angry. Not anymore. I had carried that weight for too long. What I felt now was clarity. Over the next few weeks, I got message after message. Olivia even reached out, accusing me of jealousy. You've always hated that mom and dad love me more, she said. That was the moment something broke. I realized she wasn't entirely wrong. I did resent it. I did hurt. But it wasn't hate. It was heartbreak for the child I used to be, the one who begged for approval, who starved for praise, who waited by the window for parents who were always too busy with someone else. I took a deep breath and wrote back. I don't hate you. I just finally learned to love myself enough to say no. After that message, I turned my phone off for a week. Not out of spite, but because I needed peace. I walked through the park every morning, listening to the breeze, watching kids play, and wondering what life might have looked like if I had received just a little more love and a little less comparison. My therapist once told me that forgiveness isn't always about letting someone back in. It's about releasing yourself from the grip of old wounds. So, I started forgiving not them, not yet, but myself, for trying too hard, for carrying shame that wasn't mine, for not drawing boundaries sooner. The irony was, the less I gave to my parents, the more I gained for myself. I began investing that energy into people who saw me, friends who showed up without conditions, mentors who respected me for who I was, not for how much I could sacrifice. Then, a letter came, handwritten, the envelope smudged from what I imagined were tear-streaked fingers. It was from my father. Inside were words I never thought I'd hear. We were wrong. We thought we were helping her because she was more fragile, but maybe that made you stronger, and we never said thank you. We were unfair. I see that now. I hope it's not too late. I sat with that letter for hours, read it over and over. Did I believe him? I wasn't sure, but I did believe that people change, sometimes late, sometimes imperfectly. I didn't rush to respond. Healing, after all, moves at its own pace. Eventually, I wrote back, not with anger, not with sarcasm, just truth. I told him how I remembered every moment they said no to my dreams and yes to hers. I described what it felt like to hear them call me selfish while I worked 2 jobs and studied through the night. I told him about the nights I cried, not because I wasn't strong, but because even strength breaks when it's never held. I didn't need an apology anymore. I needed him to understand that his decisions had weight, and that weight nearly buried me. And I needed to say, aloud and with clarity, that I had rebuilt myself without them, not to boast, but to honor the work it took to climb out of the hole their neglect had dug. Weeks later, another message came. It was my sister. They're selling the house to pay off some of the wedding loans. Things didn't go as planned, she wrote, and then added, I didn't know it hurt you this much. I'm sorry. That line landed hard. For the first time in decades, my sister saw me. I didn't rush to respond. I let myself feel every complex emotion: relief, bitterness, compassion, exhaustion. Healing isn't linear, and neither is reconciliation. But I knew then that I'd finally arrived at a place of peace. Not because they changed, but because I had chosen to stop bleeding for those who never noticed the cuts. The life I had now, the one I built brick by brick, was mine. Authentically, proudly, painfully mine. And there was power in that. A quiet, unshakable power they could never take away from me again. Not long after, my old high school reached out to invite me to speak at a scholarship fundraising gala. They had followed my story, the articles, the features, and wanted me to inspire the next generation of students who came from backgrounds like mine. As I stood at that podium, I looked out at the sea of young faces, many of them wearing the same hopeful uncertainty I once wore. I didn't talk about success in the traditional sense. I talked about survival, about resilience, about rebuilding when everything feels shattered. I spoke of betrayal, not as something to be bitter about forever, but as the catalyst that sometimes opens the door to strength you never knew you had. I saw tears in the eyes of students, teachers, even strangers. And in that moment, I felt a strange sense of closure. Not the kind that wraps things up neatly, but the kind that whispers, you made it. You did what they said you couldn't. And I realized that I hadn't just rewritten my story, I had given others permission to write theirs, to walk away from what hurts, to choose themselves, to build without asking for approval. That night, I donated a full scholarship in my sister's name, not because she asked or deserved it, but because I wanted to end the cycle. I wanted at least one student to rise without the burden of debt, doubt, or despair. Sometimes healing is not just choosing your own path, it's lighting the way for someone else's too. In the months that followed, life settled into a rhythm I had never known: quiet, calm, deeply satisfying. My circle was small, but genuine. My work was meaningful, but not consuming. I no longer woke up with the weight of resentment. I had made peace with the past, not because I forgot what was done to me, but because I no longer let it define me. One day, I received a letter from my father. It was handwritten, shaky. He apologized, not in the way that demanded forgiveness, but in the way that admitted truth. He told me he had watched the speech at the gala, read the article about the scholarship, that he was proud and ashamed and sorry. I cried, not because I needed his apology, but because that boy who once begged for love finally got acknowledgement. I never wrote back. Some chapters are meant to end quietly. What mattered more was what came after. I built a home, not just a house, but a space filled with laughter, warmth, music in the kitchen, books stacked on the floor. I adopted a dog. I planted a garden. I mentored young adults who came from broken homes and helped them realize that pain was not a life sentence. I lived, truly lived, on my own terms. And whenever I passed a mirror or caught my reflection in a window, I didn't see the boy who was cast aside. I saw the man who refused to stay broken. I saw strength carved from sorrow, purpose born from pain. And in that reflection, I finally saw someone I loved, and that, more than revenge or validation or justice, was the real victory.